We learned today that the local Somali community says it's dealing with backlash from that investigation.
6:42 a.m., St. Paul, Minnesota. The temperature was well below freezing. The streets of the Southern District were empty, except for the exhaust plumes of 3 unmarked federal SUVs idling at the curb. Inside those vehicles sat 11 federal inspectors from the FBI and the Department of Health and Human Services. They weren't there for a drug bust. They weren't hunting a fugitive. On paper, this was a routine compliance inspection of a state-licensed child care center. The facility was operated by Amina Farah Hassan, a 45-year-old director whose reputation raised no suspicion. According to state records, she ran 5 separate child care centers across the Twin Cities. Her filings showed that she was caring for more than 820 children every day. Because of those enrollment numbers, government subsidies arrived quietly and reliably. Over 4 years, the total amount paid to her network exceeded $2.8 billion.
State and federal agents had already raided Ali's Daycare Center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government.
When agents stepped out of their vehicles and approached the front door, the building was silent. There were no parents dropping off children. No voices. No movement. The windows were dark. The lead inspector keyed the lock and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale and cold. The space felt wrong immediately. Toys sat on shelves in perfect rows, coated in a thin layer of undisturbed dust. Cribs were fully assembled in the nursery, but the mattresses were pristine. They had never been slept on. Attendance sheets were posted neatly on the wall, filled out in blue ink. Every box was checked. Every name accounted for. Yet the room itself had never known life. This single center had received more than $46 million in taxpayer subsidies over the last 12 months. There was no evidence that even one child had spent a full day there. Inside the director's private office, investigators found proof of the deception. On the desk sat a heavy binder containing a fraudulent roster of more than 700 children. As agents flipped through the pages, they recognized the sophistication of the scheme. These weren't random names. The network had created synthetic identities, real social security numbers purchased on the dark web, paired with falsified birth certificates produced in a backroom print shop. They had created an army of ghost children who existed only inside the state's payment database.
To a fraud scheme that totaled $250 million for funding that was for a nonprofit that was supposed to help hungry children.
The true horror was in the steel safe bolted to the floor in the corner of the office. When a forensic locksmith forced it open, agents didn't find ledgers alone. They found $38 million in cash shrink-wrapped in black plastic. Sitting on top were 5 heavy packages stamped with a familiar insignia, the scorpion logo of the CJNG cartel. In that moment, inspectors understood this wasn't simple welfare fraud. This wasn't skimming or padding numbers. This was a money laundering terminal for a transnational criminal organization. Amina Farah Hassan wasn't running a daycare. She was running a cartel bank funded entirely by American taxpayers. If you believe stealing money meant for hungry children is a crime against humanity, hit the like button and comment justice below. The inspection was now a crime scene. By mid-morning, federal auditors pulled deep records tied to the facility's licensing numbers. What they found violated logic itself. The files showed Samira Abdi Hassan, a relative listed as co-director, managing multiple sites simultaneously. Birth dates overlapped. Home addresses were duplicated across different cities.
The latest allegations add to a growing list of fraud investigations in Minnesota. So far, 92 people have been charged, including 82 Somali Americans.
Yet from 2021 to 2025, total reimbursements reached $2.8 billion. In some months, deposits exceeded $74 million. The money was routed through 43 intermediary accounts before redistribution. Less than 4% could be tied to legitimate expenses like food, rent, or payroll. There were no food supply contracts, no maintenance costs. Instead, the numbers told a different story. Funds were wired overseas in carefully sized batches. Each transfer kept just below federal reporting thresholds. One account alone processed $312 million in under 9 months, without ever paying a single employee. The money flowed to East Africa, the Middle East, and shell companies in Mexico. This operation survived not because it was hidden, but because it looked normal.
Some 78 people that were charged, 72 of them were from Somalia.
Behind the perfectly completed forms was a financial machine draining billions. Investigators discovered elaborate theater operations designed to fool neighbors and inspectors alike. A schedule labeled simulation shifts, Detailed rotations for actors hired to park cars during drop-off hours. Outdoor speakers hidden in bushes played looped recordings of children laughing and playing throughout the day. They maintained a fleet of used car seats, rotated between vehicles to make parents appear legitimate. It was a Hollywood-level production designed for an audience of one, the state inspector. By evening, the investigation shifted from audit to manhunt. At 11:58 p.m., federal prosecutors authorized a coordinated operation. This was no longer an inspection. It was a sweep. Within minutes, teams mobilized across Minneapolis. All 5 child care facilities were raided simultaneously. An additional 12 affiliated offices were breached.
The State Department of Children, Youth, and Families, who licenses child care centers, didn't comment either.
As teams moved through the buildings, alarms triggered across the financial network. Money began moving at panic speed. In less than 18 minutes, more than $96 million was rerouted through financial tunnels designed to collapse once activated. Someone knew the feds were inside. Then confirmation arrived that turned the operation into a pursuit. Surveillance showed Amina Farah Hassan had left her residence hours earlier. License plate readers tracked her vehicle heading south. Maritime records showed a private vessel scheduled to depart before dawn. She was running. Analysts tracing encrypted communications identified a hub 30 miles outside the city. It was an industrial property listed as abandoned.
FBI Director Kash Patel promised a surge of resources to investigate, and lawmakers in the House are expanding their own investigation.
Tax records showed no activity for years, but utility data told the truth. Electricity usage surged nightly. Water consumption exceeded 90,000 gallons per day. At 3:36 a.m., aerial surveillance confirmed movement. Vehicles entered the compound in timed intervals. Exhaust plumes rose from multiple vents. This wasn't a warehouse. It was a factory, funded by money stolen from Minnesota's children. We are tracking arrest warrants for every individual involved. Hit subscribe so you don't miss updates. At 12:21 a.m., the final order was given. Objective, entry. Floodlights cut through the darkness as tactical teams advanced. The structure no longer resembled a warehouse. It was fortified. A controlled charge peeled back the steel door. Inside, the air wasn't just hot, it was toxic. Agents reported a metallic taste instantly. Industrial scrubbers lined the walls, running at full capacity to mask chemical signatures from satellites. Conveyor belts continued moving. Output counters ticked upward. Behind a secondary corridor, agents found the human cost.
Insist because of alleged fraud in Minnesota, they're feeling the backlash on social media, seeing less business in their stores, and insist some retailers just too afraid to open their...
In a dim holding room, they found 61 individuals. 17 were American citizens. Others came from multiple countries. Several had been reported missing 6 to 9 months earlier. They sat on the floor, malnourished and terrified. One man's pulse barely registered above 40 beats per minute. These workers weren't just captives, they were ghosts. Their fingerprints had been burned off with acid to prevent identification if they escaped. This was the cartel's insurance policy against humanity. While rescue teams evacuated the captives, evidence teams advanced to the production floor. What they found stunned seasoned agents. The facility used stolen child care funds to purchase precursor chemicals. Ledgers showed $1.4 billion spent in 18 months. The factory produced 32 to 38 tons of fentanyl per day and over 70 tons of cocaine per week. It was a closed loop. The government paid the daycares. The daycares laundered the money. The money funded the factory. The drugs destroyed the community. By 4:19 a.m., production spanned 4 levels. 1 week's output exceeded $3.2 billion in value. As dawn approached, the compound fell silent.
Going to an education center that can't even spell learning correctly.
At 10:26 a.m., federal briefings began. The confirmed taxpayer loss exceeded $4.3 billion, assistance that never reached its intended recipients. Investigators estimated 68,000 low-income children lost access to child care as legitimate providers closed, unable to compete with a fraud ring that paid for nothing. In some neighborhoods, licensed capacity fell by 22%. The system wasn't blind, chose not to look. Oversight became procedural. Automation replaced accountability. This case exposes a fundamental weakness in the American welfare system. Speed replaced verification. Compassion was weaponized. Bureaucrats were afraid to ask questions, and billions were stolen. Amina Farah Hassan didn't look like a criminal. She looked like a community pillar. She followed the rules, filed paperwork, and stole the future in plain sight. The factory is shut down. The money is frozen. But the question remains, how many other empty facilities are collecting millions right now while children go without? If you believe every welfare program in America needs a full audit, comment accountability below. Stay vigilant.